Hi, welcome to the Online Jewelry Academy. I'm Professor John Ahr and I'm your instructor. In this video, I'm going to show you how to size down a ring. Now you might be wondering, when do I need to size down a ring? What if your mother-in-law, who has big old paws, gives you, with dainty little fingers, a ring and you want to wear it? Well, you're going to have to size it down to fit. Otherwise, you're going to put it on a chain and wear it around your neck like Carrie Bradshaw. And nobody wants you to do that. So, pay attention and I'll show you everything you need to know. Now, there are 4 rules to ring sizing. The first one is very important. If you look at this little drawing I have on the table right here, it really illustrates it. If you have a ring that has a fancy pattern on it, or even just a twisted pattern, any pattern, if you size it down, look what happens. That pattern gets all messed up, and your ring is going to have an obvious place where it's soldered shut. So if you're doing this for a client or a friend, be sure that you let them know that this is going to happen, otherwise they're going to be upset. But if you don't like the friend, don't tell them. But it's an important rule to remember. Now, another rule is don't size a ring up or down more than 2 sizes. If you do it more than 2 sizes, you can potentially make it look really funky, or you can manipulate it so much that stones won't fit back inside of it. So no more than 2 sizes. Another rule is you never size the ring with stones in it. And I know you've seen on TV commercials where some jeweler at some jewelry store in your area is soldering on a diamond ring with that diamond in place. Well, he knows what he's doing and he knows how to get away with that. And nowadays, people wouldn't actually do that. They would laser weld it if they were going to leave the stones in. For you working with the torch, don't size with stones in place. And lastly, if you're a super newbie beginner, don't take on the project unless you want to get a divorce from that person or you want to lose that friend. Well, if you want to get rid of them, maybe you do the project. But if you're brand new to this, practice before you take on a project like this for a friend or for a client, because you are potentially asking for problems. Okay, now that you know that, let me show you what some of the tools are that you could use in this project. First of all, you're going to need a ring sizer. You're going to need to know what the client's finger size is. And you're also going to need, this is a new tool that we haven't introduced before, it's called a divider. A pair of dividers is crucial whenever you're working with ring sizing. You're also going to need a ring sizing ruler, or if your Mandrel has a ring sizing gauge on it, you can use that as well. But we'll also need a saw frame and blade. Perhaps you might need a triangle scraper to get rid of a burr, a file to even out areas. Already mentioned the ring gauge, or the ring mandrel, which has a gauge on it, I should say. You also need a couple of pairs of pliers. I recommend having at least 1 pair of half-round pliers. That's where one jaw is rounded and the other one is flat. You'll need your calipers for correct measurement. Accuracy is everything. And you're going to need a ring clamp to hold the piece while you're working on it. You'll also need a rawhide mallet in order to round the ring when you're finished. And then on the soldering side of things, you're obviously going to need some hard solder. You'll need a quenching bowl, a flux brush and some flux. You might want to work on top of a charcoal block, but you're definitely going to need to work on some kind of heat-resistant surface, and here I have a piece of a kiln shelf down. I also have a third hand, a torch, and a ventilation system, and there's a great video on how to make this ventilation system. It's funny too. And last but not least, safety equipment. Be safe. Don't lose an eye, okay? Now, the first thing that I want to do is I want to determine if the ring has any seams in it, and I want to find them. Now, this is important because, especially if you're working on, say, like an antique ring, you don't know if it's been sized before or not, but the last jeweler left you clues. And you're looking at my ring and you're going, wait a minute, John, that's a copper ring. Who the hell wears a copper ring? Nobody, maybe a Viking, but nobody wears copper. I make these to show you because they're easy to see And I want to inspire you to practice. Practice on some copper wire and make some pieces to play with before you go to work for a client. Okay, now even if this was a gold ring or a silver ring that was properly soldered with either gold or silver solder, what I'm about to show you would still work. And the reason it works is solder is an alloy. It is a combination of materials that have been put together so that they melt at certain temperature ranges. And in order for that to happen, there's probably some copper in the solder. So what that means is if I do this test on a silver ring, the silver solder is going to show up or appear first because it's going to be the first to oxidize because of the copper. Now in this case, since the ring is copper and I used silver solder to solder it, what's going to happen is the copper will darken and the silver seam will appear because it's a lighter metal. Okay, so I'm going to turn on the torch and I'm going to lightly heat the ring. Don't heat it to the point where it glows. You just want to heat it a little bit where oxidation begins to occur. Okay? And that ring looks like it's beginning to get a little bit heat stained, so I can stop. Okay, so I'm going to pick it up with my third hand here and just quench it so I can handle it. Now if I look at the ring surface and I look around on it, I can probably begin to see, oh there it is, the little trace element. You can barely see it. It's right there, right in the front. You can see where the silver is kind of shining a little bit brighter than the copper. Now I know where that seam is. Now that's important because think about it. What if it was an antique ring and maybe 2 or 3 brides had worn this ring? There could be several seams on here where it was sized for each woman's different size hand. So you need to know where the seams are, because if there's more than one, let's face it, if you start heating it and you don't know where the seams are, a little chunk could fall out because it was sized up for somebody. Okay, I don't want to confuse you too much. Let's just keep going. All right, so I'm going to sit down now. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to determine what size the ring actually is. So I'm putting it on the ring mandrel. I'll slide it down. And this tells me that I'm at a size 7.5. So for this exercise, I'm going to size it down a half size. Remember, a full size is 2.5 millimeters, so half a size is 1.25 millimeters. So you're working with the metric system. It should be easy to figure this out. And if you forget, you can always use your ring sizing ruler with your calipers, and you could just measure the different sizes to get, they're all the same, but you would get that same 2.5 measurement. So I'm going to set my caliper to 1.25. Now if you have an electronic caliper, this is going to be even easier because you just look at the big numbers. I have to work with a vernier caliper that's an old standard and I'm setting it. So now I need to make the points of my dividers match the points of my calipers. Or I could measure just right on top from the 0 mark to the other 0 mark in order to get this absolutely correct. Remember, when you're sizing something, it's got to be absolutely accurate. Okay, so I've got them now where point to point they match up. It's perfect. So I can put the calipers away. By the way, dividers are a good way to record a measurement. So if you're doing something again and again and again, if you've got it set on the dividers, you never have to look at it more than once. Okay, so I've got the seam face up in my ring clamp. I put the wedge in and I'm going to lock it in. Then I put this into the V of my bench pin and I'm going to take my dividers and I'm going to look to see where that seam is, and I'm going to mark on either side of the seam, just like that. Just one stroke to scribe those 2 lines. You don't want to have too many lines. Okay, so I'm looking at it and I'm going to Saw on this line first. Oh, look at that. Okay, so some of you are going to get to that point and go, wait a minute, my ring is stuck on there. What do I do? Just loosen the blade and take it off. That's all you got to do. And then I'm just going to set my blade back on, tighten it up, and I'm ready to do the other side. Okay, and now I just need to saw on the other line. Now notice that I'm using the whole length of the blade. That helps me to keep my accuracy. Okay, so now I have a little piece of the ring that's been cut out. And that piece should measure 1.25 millimeters. Okay, so now that that's been removed, all I need to do are bring the two edges of the ring together. So I would prefer to use half-round pliers. I'm going to keep the rounded jaw on the inside and the flat one on the outside, and I'm just going to start to finesse these two halves together. Okay, now, what if you didn't do a great job of sawing? What could you do? Well, the first thing that you could do is you could file, but filing might make things even more inaccurate. Okay, so let me put this down carefully so you can see it. I've got my seam back together. Now, let's pretend that you are not as practiced as I am and that you made a mistake. Maybe one side went a little bit cockeyed. Let me show you a simple way of fixing it. What you're going to do is you're going to take your ring clamp, put the ring with the seam back up on top, and close the ring clamp, then come back to your bench pin, pick up your saw frame, and just saw right through the seam. Okay. Now by doing that, what I managed to do, I won't push it back together, but you can see they're perfectly straight. They're ready to go back together. Now I might have lost a little tiny bit more metal, but I can stretch it out when I round it on the ring mandrel because it's just a simple band. Okay, so I'm going to take my pliers, I'll put that seam back together. Remember, you want everything to line up perfectly. If you get everything right the first time, you don't have to mess with it. Now, when you cut, sometimes you may get a little bit of a burr or a little bit of that metal that comes up. I'll just take the triangle scraper and I'll scrape it out of the inside of the ring. Really easy. Okay, now I'm ready to solder this shut. And I'm going to use my third hand to help me do this. Okay, so I'm going to put the ring in the third hand. And let me just adjust this. And I want to position it so that you can see it easier at home. Okay, so you are probably wondering, gee, why did he put the ring down like that? Well, the flat part, or the interior of the ring that's flat, is easier to hold a piece of solder while I'm soldering than the rounded portion on the outside of the ring. Plus, if I position it this way, what I can do is I can take the torch and heat underneath and pull the solder through the ring using heat. Okay, now remember, every soldering operation to be successful needs a little bit of flux, because you need that flux to create that oxygen-free environment in which solder can flow. Okay, So I've got a little bit of flux there. Now I want to open up my solder. Now normally I pick up my solder with a pair of tweezers, but in this case I'm just going to dip in with the tip of my brush and I'm going to grab 2 pallions of solder and position them on the seam so that they're bridging the seam. Now, just a quick dry run through. What I'm going to do is I'm going to light the torch, heat underneath, and if any of the solder jumps to one of the 2 sides, I'll use my solder pick to push it back so that it again bridges the seam so that it flows through the seam. Okay, let's light the torch. Alright, now gently tickle the object with the end of the flame because the flux needs to evaporate out any water. You don't want to bounce off the solder by heating the flux too fast. Okay, so remember, the secret to successful soldering is heat the whole thing. Get the whole thing to come to temperature and you shouldn't have any problem. Okay, my solder is staying in the correct position. And my flux has dried out and it looks like my solder is getting ready to flow. Okay. Be sure to quench your tools so you don't burn yourself and quench your work. Now normally what I would do is I would pickle and brass brush this before I go on, but you can check that out in our other videos. Just make sure that you don't have any excess solder on the inside of the ring because that can deform the exterior. The last step that you would need to take really would be to put this onto your ring mandrel. It's annealed because of the soldering process, so pull it down, and then you're going to use a rawhide mallet to stretch the ring back down to the appropriate size. And I'm going for a size 7. And there you can see I have it perfectly over the size 7 line. So I got it right to the 7 that I was going for. I hope you have fun sizing those rings to fit your fingers. Check out our other related videos on pickling, polishing, tumbling, whatever you need to do to finish your piece. And if you like this video, like it and share it with your friends. You can also check out our other videos and projects on the onlinejewelryacademy.com. Thanks for watching.